So, Matt, what's your reaction to this choice, and how do you think the addition of Governor Walz maybe changes this Democratic ticket in the race going forward?
Well, first, I know it was probably a difficult choice for the vice presidents because of the abundance of riches of candidates that were available to her. So I think any of the options that she had would have been good. I think this is particularly very smart because I think the battleground for this entire election is the Midwest. And I put Pennsylvania in the Midwest because it's grouped around those states in this. And he has demonstrated a unique ability to relate in a values way, in an issues way, and just a personality way to people in the Midwest, whether it's Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, whatever state it happens to be. I think it's a particularly really good pick. And I think his election history has shown he's able to move the demographics that need to be moved. Young voters, he does really well with. White women, he does really well with. Independents, he does really well with. And so I think it's as I say, a particularly really, really smart choice.
Yeah, we already saw one Gen Z organization putting out a statement very excited about the possibilities. Yamiche, Governor Walz, however, was not considered, at least initially, a top choice. So what can you tell us about how he became the selection?
Well, Vice President Harris, based on my reporting, started off with a list of at least a dozen people that she was looking at, and she winnowed down that list. And we know over the weekend that a number of people met with her, at least three, that being Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as well as Mark Kelly, the senator of Arizona, and Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. She, of course, ultimately went with Walz. And I should also say that one of the top contenders, or a couple of the top contenders, we're thinking of Roy Cooper, the governor of North Carolina, he dropped out. You had Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. She also said that she didn't want to be considered. So there were some people who were taking themselves out, and then there were some people who really were impressing her. And then I was told it came down to a number of things, one of them being the rapport, the chemistry, feeling as though she could really trust him, and as someone that he would also have her back. So that was really important to her as she was making this decision, because he's going to be someone who's going to be on the ticket, but also could ultimately serve 4 years in the White House with her. I was also told his executive experience was really, really important here, that he's the governor of a state that's a midway state that is blue, but a state that the Democrats work for every single year, I'm told. And his policies in that state were also very appealing to her. Things like passing universal school lunch, things for children, things like the child tax credit, also codifying Roe v. Wade, ensuring abortion access for women and for people in the state of Minnesota. I was also told that his background, his bio, was something that they were very interested in. The fact that he's a teacher, he's a veteran of the National Guard, he's a hunter, he's a gun owner, he's someone who also has a sort of real understanding, they think, of everyday Americans and the issues that make them tick. And he's an effective communicator. You know, you just played that clip of him talking about sort of Republicans. They wanted someone who was going to be an attack dog because they do believe that Republicans are just going to get uglier and uglier with their attacks against Vice President Harris. So when he settled on the word weird, one word to describe Republicans, weird, that impressed them because it was showing that he was someone who could boil down the message that Democrats want to send about former President Trump, about J.D. Vance, and just call them weird. We've also seen that language be echoed by the Harris campaign. I got an email that said J.D. Vance is a creep. That also is in line with the sort of language that Democrats are using now against Republicans. And last but not least, I mean, there's the idea that he's someone who can just bring more people into the party. I've been talking to voters, and a lot of them here in Pennsylvania have been saying, we don't really know that much about him, but we're excited about the fact that he's a teacher. Or we don't know that much about him, but we're excited about the fact that he's someone who seems as though he's going to be excited to be on the ticket and support a woman. One of the things that I was hearing when I was doing this reporting was she wanted someone, and the people around her really wanted someone who wasn't going to undermine her. If he ends up in the White House, he's going to be behind the first woman president, the first Black and Asian woman to hold that job, and they want to make sure that that's somebody who can take that on, who can take her leadership and her tasks at hand. And lastly, there's this background on civil rights. I was just talking to Keith Ellison, the Minnesota Attorney General. He said there would be no George Floyd conviction if it wasn't for Tim Walz, because he was the one who stepped in and said, we're going to take this over as a state and get this conviction for this family. Chris?
Yamiche, by the way, we just learned that he is wheels up from Minnesota and is on his way to where you are. So thank you for that reporting. Much appreciated. Also with me is Sabrina Rodriguez, a national political reporter for The Washington Post. You have a great profile today of Walz. the country is essentially, at least the majority of the country, is going to be introduced to him when he attends that rally in Philly tonight. So who's the man they're going to meet?
I mean, they're going to meet a man who is as excited to be in this position and this situation as you can imagine. Really, I think a colleague of mine, Ben Terris, had this amazing profile that just looked at his time as a public school teacher. And that is something that he has brought into his position when he was in Congress, into his position as governor, and will likely be bringing into this position as Kamala Harris's VP pick. I mean, he talks so much about the impact of public education, about his time as a teacher, what he learned in that role, about his time as a veteran. He really talks about, you know, his roots in rural America and him growing up in Nebraska. So he really brings a variety of things to the ticket that differ from Kamala Harris's experience. And that is something that we know she was really looking at when she was interviewing finalists, when she was trying to narrow down on the pick. Was key to her was, of course, to have rapport with this person who is someone that she feels like she can work with for the next 4 years or potentially 8 years, who is the person who she thinks is going to really be in her corner, but also who is the person who's going to be able to complement her on the campaign trail. And we see with Walz's record, as you know, one of the fun facts that we learned in our reporting for the profile, he is the first Democratic vice presidential pick on the ticket to not be a lawyer for the first time since 1964. That is 60 years. And that can't be understated. He has a very different profile than we've seen with a lot of VP picks in the past, in terms of just his upbringing, the work he did leading up to being in Congress and being governor. And I think that's something we're going to hear a lot about from him on the campaign trail. He's not a traditional pick.
Yeah, Jim, I don't need to tell you, the relatability factor is something that a lot of people, particularly in the Midwest where I'm from, look for. And it was so interesting to watch the minute this pick got announced. Neighbors started just streaming out of their houses in his neighborhood. And I want to play a little bit of what they had to say.
He's so down to earth, and I'm a teacher like he was, and there's just something about teachers that get things, I think, and they can just talk to people.
I want to say surprised, but not surprised, because he is the perfect person for the job. He is just such a person of integrity and stability. He provides this level of unification that our country desperately needs right now.
So clearly popular in the neighborhood, Jim, but how does the campaign help that translate to, again, a public who, I think it was 71%, had never even heard of him?
Yeah, by getting him out there, by putting him in these communities. I mean, his ability to connection is what all those people just talked about. And so getting him on the ground, I think they're going to put him in a bus and get him in western Wisconsin, coming up here and doing a bunch of these things. He really has that ability. His old congressional district he held was a district that Donald Trump won by over 10 points. You know, that shows his ability to win these voters that the the Harris campaign is going to need in November in these three crucial battleground states. I agree with Yamiche. This really is about Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And for those states, Tim Walz is a home run pick.
So let's talk about the possible downside here, because we're already starting to hear some of it, right, Jim? They're attacking him as a radical leftist. Other Republicans have said he was the one in charge of the Minnesota riots in 2020 as a result of George Floyd. What are the vulnerabilities? How do you think the campaign has prepared to deal with what they know is coming?
Oh, look, I think they're willing to have this fight. I mean, the Republicans have the same mantra they're always going to do. Democrats are going to try to take this back to hope, back to enthusiasm. And, you know, I agree with the earlier reporting. He's so enthusiastic about this. He really fits her ticket. He fits the mood of the country. The country wants someone who's excited to be there, who's positive, who wants to make this case. And so they'll try to stay positive. They'll take the hits and keep on coming by just saying, look, this is about the future versus the past. And the more the Republicans want to attack, the more quickly they're going to go back to this frame of being in the past. And I think that's helpful to Democrats. And I think that's why this pick is so exciting for the Democratic Party, because they want to have a fight about the future here.
So it's about the future, Matt, but it's also about something you and I have talked about, I think, at least once a week for the last year, which is the middle, right? Those voters who are really going to decide this election in that handful of battleground states. NBC News reported that the campaign has been very clear. They want to appeal specifically, among other groups, to white men who don't like Donald Trump, but frankly, may be a little nervous about Kamala Harris, a black and South Asian woman. Does Walz get them there?
Well, we have a bit of evidence that he does in this, and I'll just add on one thing. These ideological campaigns that the Republicans think they can run is just not going to work. It's never worked. It didn't work against Obama in 2008, 2012. It didn't work against Governor Walz when he first ran in 2018. It didn't work against Tony Evers. It didn't work against Gretchen Whitmer. It didn't work against Senator Fetterman, who's in Pennsylvania. All of these states, they have to carry ideological campaigns don't work in this. I think that he's already demonstrated this. If you take a look at the 2016 race when Hillary ran in Minnesota versus the first time that Governor Walz got elected in 2018 in this, and you take a look at the data among white voters with no degree, Hillary Clinton lost those voters by 27 points. Governor Walz only lost those voters by 4 points, a 23-point shift among white voters with no college degree. Among white women, Hillary Clinton lost the white women by 1 point in Minnesota. Governor Walz won them by 21 points, a 22-point shift in Minnesota in those groups. And so I think we only have one sample, which is Minnesota, because it's the only place he's run statewide. But the data that's available, he's moved all of the voters that Vice President Harris needs to move in order to win this race in much bigger margins than Joe Biden even did when he won in 2020. So from a demographic movement pattern in the Midwest, I think he's perfect for it.